Good morning and welcome back to Planet Althistory. Today we are going to discuss what if Bitcoin became universally adopted as world currency. Bitcoin is the most known cryptocurrency in the world. As many of you know, Bitcoin is heavily linked with the blockchain technology. Bitcoin doesn't exist physically, but it only exists digitally. That's why people also sometimes call it a digital currency. It is a decentralized currency without a central bank, or also without a single administrator. It also has no CIO, and it's also not a company. And there's also no group of people who can administrate it. Bitcoin can be sent from one user to another on the peer-to-peer Bitcoin network without the need for intermediaries. So this means that when you see a person and both of you have a Bitcoin wallet, both of you can send it to each other. It's kind of like cash, only that digital. Transactions are verified by network nodes through cryptography and recorded in a public distributed ledger called a blockchain. This means that computers that are part of this network are all able to record and verify any transaction. Bitcoins are created as a reward for a process known as mining, which is essential to keep computers in this network, because without any reward there is no initiative for people to be part of this network. Bitcoin can nowadays be exchanged for many goods, services, money, resources, old coins, etc. Nowadays there are many millions of unique users using a cryptocurrency wallet, most of them of course using Bitcoin, the gold of the digital currencies. Bitcoin has been praised but also criticized. Many people who praise it are people who see Bitcoin as the solution for many flaws of our current financial system, while the critics mostly say that Bitcoin is speculative, it is a risky asset and it goes to zero. Well, Bitcoin crashed many times, but still, it's way up than zero. The proponents, however, argue that it is normal to see such price fluctuation, as Bitcoin is something very new and it needs to find its true price. Nowadays Bitcoin is not treated like a stock, but more like a commodity similar to gold and silver, and also in few cases like money, of course. There are only 21 million Bitcoins, and many of them they were already mined. Many more are kept in cold wallets. Others they just have been lost, or there's just no password to access this so-called wallets. So the race for Bitcoin is becoming hotter and hotter each and every day. Moreover, Bitcoin can be divided up until as many decimals as needed. This was created on purpose by Satoshi Nakamoto. Due to heavy critiques from governments, central banks and other private banks, Bitcoin has a difficult path in becoming, well, what it was meant to become. To give people the freedom to transact among themselves without these transactions being controlled by governments or mega corporations or banks or what the heck you want to name. To enable monetary freedom, this was the main purpose of Bitcoin. And even that someday to become the world currency. Scams using Bitcoin and the fact that transactions are irreversible and the constant propaganda that dollar, euro and other fiat money is safe, well, this doesn't help Bitcoin either. But what if all of that changed? What if Bitcoin became universally adopted as world currency? For this I propose you two different scenarios. In the first one, scenario 1, Bitcoin would be invented almost 10 years earlier, or with the dot-com bubble. And the second scenario is that Bitcoin would almost have no critiques and everyone would see Bitcoin as great, but this is a very ASB scenario. So please keep that in mind. The dot-com bubble was the consequence of the rise of the internet and internet companies. One of these companies is nowadays known as Amazon. There was also eBay, for instance. And many other companies, they just went bankrupt, as they were not producing much. Bitcoin could perfectly fit into such an environment where the internet was on the rise and where Bitcoin would see itself as the money of the internet, which it actually does even in our timeline. The first problems one would encounter would of course be the strength of the computers, the easiness to manipulate the whole blockchain, the limited number of transactions and whatnot. But due to the fact that Bitcoin is considered open source, people would work on it and improve it over time. We would most likely see some more forks of Bitcoin and have Bitcoin 2, Bitcoin Cash, Bitcoin Speed, Bitcoin XYZ, you name it. But the one and only true Bitcoin would continue to exist, and I believe that Bitcoin could fill a gap early on in time where PayPal was unheard of and where something like Beans existed but ultimately vanished. Beans was a centralized company while Bitcoin would be uncentralized, and many pages selling goods and services could profit from Bitcoin transactions at some point. These pages and online companies would thus also ask their professionals to contribute to the Bitcoin open source, and as a result we would have more people in that timeline working on Bitcoin and the Bitcoin code than in our timeline. I am sure that PayPal and credit card options would still appear after time, but Bitcoin would appeal to people who just like to use the internet and who would not like to convert a currency into different currency. This would be the advantage of Bitcoin. There would be no need to convert it into another currency. And also the fact that credit cards, giving the numbers of the credit cards and the password would also be seen as too risky, so it's just better to have a certain amount of Bitcoin, use it when you make the purchase, and you're more secure that actually nobody can use the other Bitcoins that you still have, while when people have the password of your credit card and the PIN code and whatnot, good luck. Well, adoption of course would be very slow in the first years, and what could rise Bitcoin as a serious alternative as global currency would be, the financial crisis of 2007 if you are in the US, or of 2008 and 2009 if you're more in the rest of the world. Banks would not be trusted as a result because, banks would be bailed out in this timeline as well as in our timeline. They have been bailed out. They were rescued with taxpayers' money, and it is possible that with the rise of the internet, a more political dimension could influence Bitcoin, and with that, Bitcoin could gain more traction, and many banks, governments, and central banks would not really be able to fight it, as they were too occupied with austerity policies, rescuing banks, and also rescuing the currency, and printing more money, of course. Some banks would most likely readapt and adopt Bitcoin into their offer, or once something like the Lightning Network would be established and be improved on. Some banks may be able to readapt, some central banks would get some Bitcoins, but at the end, the banking model as we know it, it would definitely change for good. And the idea of national currencies, this would start to crumble. Wasn't the euro already something that defied the definition of a national currency? Wasn't the dollar already accepted almost worldwide? So why not Bitcoin? Something that was actually seen as an improvement if we consider the euro and the dollars where banks have to be rescued. How this new banking system would look like and what it would do is uncertain, but after the crisis some attempts to perhaps ban Bitcoin would be made, but it would lead to nothing, as it would already be too late. The rise of the internet and the rise of Bitcoin would coincide, and slowly but surely, since 4G and 5G technology would exist, Bitcoin would be very much established as a world currency. Smartphones, they would all have Bitcoin wallets. Microtransactions in games would be done with a few Satoshi or even milli Satoshi. VAT would rise as many forward taxes would be too difficult to get due to the nature of Bitcoin. No interest rates would really exist, and inflation or deflations would anyways be known, and the Bitcoin halving would, it would just be celebrated. It would be a date where many people would celebrate it. The second scenario, which I will keep much shorter, is a very hypothetical situation where Bitcoin suddenly sees a great boom, much bigger than in our timeline. This means that mining difficulty would increase much more, security in Bitcoin network would be improved on, more focus would be put on the Lightning Network, and with such a boom and a positive view of banks and central banks, Bitcoin would be adopted into their program. Now, of course, you can now say that many miners, they would just jump off, or there would be no miner at all, but I believe that even with such a boom, people would still be able to readapt, and there would be just a few more bigger miner companies than in our timeline. Banks would offer certain Bitcoin services which would take off, and the banks could readapt with Bitcoin much easier in this second hypothetical scenario. Banks would buy mining equipment and try to outcompete themselves, while central banks would give certain quotas and try to take the fiat money out of circulation slowly but surely, and try to buy Bitcoin and become more like a reserve bank of each and every state that exists. This means that the Bitcoin price would see a parabolic but constant move without bigger volatility. Bitcoin would lose its appeal as more libertarian currency, as the governments would now try to remodel Bitcoin to their purposes and readapt themselves only partially towards Bitcoin. This means that cryptocurrencies like Monero, for instance, they would see a much bigger popularity than in our timeline, and perhaps even become the second biggest cryptocurrency. Sometimes volatility would arise, especially in the beginning, when the retail investors would know that something would be up to, and that the governments would make sure that, they would not suddenly announce something that they would be buying Bitcoins, but some insiders, they would still leak out information, and some more smart retail investors, they would jump in, and this would create some volatility in the price. It would rather be seen as a parallel currency for the first many years that would come, and Bitcoin would not be declared as the unique currency, because you cannot just change and just take away the whole currencies that you already have, but there would be a few steps undertaken to actually do something like that. Until the moment where we would see that Bitcoin would get a preferential treatment, as similar with credit cards, for instance, in Sweden, where many places they only nowadays take credit cards or debit cards and no cash. And then Bitcoin would be the only currency, becoming ultimately the universally adopted world currency. And that's where we leave it for now. That's it for today. I hope you enjoyed my video. Be sure to like and subscribe, leave a comment, support me also on Patreon, and join my forum, forum.planetalthistory.ga. Until next time on Planet Alt History.